Good morning and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to what I know will be an exciting 60 minutes or so of history and legacy as we celebrate with one of the oldest and largest private firms here on the island, George F. Huggins Grenada Limited. Yesterday, July 20th, Huggins, as they are fondly known by all, celebrated a major milestone for any company, 100 years of operation. 100 years of service to Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, a century of service. The company had actually embarked on a year of celebration starting in January 2020, fitting for such a momentous occasion, and kicked off the year with a number of activities, including a Thanksgiving service at the Blessed Sacrament Church in Grand Anse earlier in this year. Indeed, this month was originally scheduled for a massive outdoor celebration to mark the event with staff and customers alike. But of course, who could have foreseen that instead the world would be faced by a global pandemic, the coronavirus? However, a company like Huggins doesn't get to be 100 years without surviving a myriad of ups and downs, from hurricanes to revolutions. And so this is just another hurdle that the Huggins family, now over 500 strong, must face together. And like any family, they find strength in each other. And they are determined to celebrate a century of service, despite having to change and adapt their plans to meet health and safety guidelines of the new COVID-19 normal. I am Sheldon Douglas, and it is my unique honor and privilege to be your moderator this morning, and we are being broadcast live on a number of social media platforms, including the Huggins Foodland Facebook page. This morning, we are at the Huggins main headquarters at the GCNA building on Kirani James Boulevard. And thanks to our team of professionals, we have been set up in a nicely spaced out, physically distanced setting to be able to share the amazing story of George F. Huggins Grenada Limited. I have with me this morning a distinguished panel of speakers who collectively easily surpass 100 years of service to Huggins in some capacity. So let me introduce our guests. To my immediate right, I have Mr. Franklin Royston LaHaye. At the time of his retirement, of course, he is more generally known as Royston LaHaye. and you will find a comedian as we go along here. At the time of his retirement in 2017, he was a director of Huggins and had been with the company for more than 40 years. He started small, holding a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of the West Indies and a Diploma in Management Studies. In 1977, he joined Huggins as garage manager for the then automotive department on Market Hill. He would work his way up to general manager of the motor unit and accessories department, which later became the Huggins Automotive Division, which we are all familiar with on Morris Bishop Highway. He joined the board of directors at Huggins in July 2004. He's a staunch member of the Grenada Methodist community and a distinctive voice in the Methodist choir. His name is synonymous with sports in this country. A past president of the Grenada Basketball Association, past president of the Grenada Football Association, and the longest serving president of the Grenada Olympic Committee, to name but a few. He's a holder of the British Empire Medal and a member of the British Empire for his contribution to sports. He has a reputation as a charmer, I am told, and on top of that, happens to be my cousin. Next to this goodly gentleman, I have Dr. Nicole Phillip-Dowe, who holds a PhD in history from the University of the West Indies. She is currently head of site at the University of the West Indies Open Campus, Grenada. She has written, co-authored, and co-edited 4 books, as well as written articles for 3 journals and 1 magazine, including her book that she co-authored and edited entitled Perspectives on the Grenada Revolution, 1979 to 1983. Dr. Phillip-Dowe provides community service by giving lectures and talks on history, culture, and other related issues. She is also an educator, fundraiser for charitable causes, and a noted public speaker on the lecture circuit. I don't know if I'm letting secrets out, but Dr. Phillip-Dowe is working on yet another book. And how that project intersects with the legacy of Huggins and companies like it, I hope she will give us some more insight into as this panel discussion proceeds. Next to Dr. Phillip-Dowe, I have Mr. Kent Joseph, multifaceted local businessman, entrepreneur, sports manager, and promoter, philanthropist, and humanitarian. Mr. Joseph has been awarded by the Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce. He's a former senator under the NDC administration. He started from very humble beginnings with a small store called Market View, a small gym underneath his house, and a small bakery. Today, we know him as the owner-manager of Excel Plaza, Body Image Health Club, Homemade Bakery, Movie Palace, Chef Castle Restaurant, apartments, and home furnishing stores. Some here may even be old enough to remember him as the owner of the Phoenix brand of cigarettes, MEN as they were fondly called at one time. However, most pertinent in today's discussion, Mr. Joseph worked at Huggins Grenada in his early career around the late 70s, serving as marketing manager for more than 8 divisions at the time, for more than 14 years, one of the youngest to do so. And of course, it brings me to our last guest, Mrs. Anya C Chow, who is the current chairman of the board and CEO of George F. Huggins Grenada Limited. She is also a director and corporate secretary of Agostini Insurance Brokers Grenada Limited. She is chairman of the board of directors for the Grenada Airports Authority, former director of the Grenada Board of Tourism, assistant general secretary of the Grenada Olympic Committee, a proud graduate of the St. Joseph's Convent, St. George's. Mrs. Chow Chung holds a Bachelor of Laws degree with honors from the University of the West Indies and a legal education certificate from the Hugh Wooding Law School in Trinidad. She's passionate about her faith, her children, and she is a former member of the National Zero Hunger Challenge Initiative Committee, a former PRO of the Grenada Optimist Club, and a third-degree black belt in the martial art of karate, a current member of the Grenada national team, and holds a number of regional titles in the sport. Oh, did I also mention she has time to be CEO of the largest locally owned firm in Grenada with over 500 employees spread across a range of 17 different business operations. No doubt she is indeed a busy lady, and we are grateful to have her and the rest of this very esteemed panel here. So I've introduced you to our panelists, and we've heard and seen how they are all interconnected to Huggins as they celebrate this milestone, 100 years, a century of service. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the time is now. We're live on many social media platforms, and I hope a number of persons are tuning in to learn, be educated, and to find out just a little bit more about the household name that we all know as Huggins. So my first question is going to be for you, Mr. Joseph. You joined Huggins in the 70s as a very young manager. The company had just been or was in the process of being led by the then CEO, Mr. George A. Meniz, fondly known as Richard Meniz. He too was a very young man. What can you tell us about the early days of Mr. Meniz's era? How did you work to establish George F. Huggins as the household name that it is today during what must have been the very turbulent backdrop of the 70s?
First of all, good morning to you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, Anya. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Royston. And thank you for inviting me to this session. And I'm happy to be here because where I'm now, as an owner-entrepreneur of a company that has about 60 staff members, a lot of it has to be with the experience and training under George F. Huggins and Company Limited, and your dad, Mr. Meniz himself. I joined Huggins in 1970, to be exact. I was 18 years old. I had I came from Trinidad at the age 15, and I worked with a company called General Traders Limited. And I have to give a little background as to how I came across. I asked for a job at Huggins, moving from General Traders because it was sold, to Mr. Alistair Charles, who was then head of Huggins' insurance department. The gentleman then put me on to Mr. Protein, who was then acting as the human resource manager. I don't think it carried that title at that time, but he was a director personnel manager, you know. And because of my training at General Traders in the lumber and hardware, I entered Huggins' lumber department on the carnage as a clerk under the management of the deceased Ronald Lashley, who, as a matter of fact, became my best man at my wedding, which happened just a year after that, after 18. The G.A. Menyes, Richard Menyes, I remembered him and his wife, your mum, prior to that, at Royal Bank of Canada. They both worked there. And I think he joined in either 1966 or 67, a few years just prior to when I entered. At that time, I think it was in the accounts department. He became credit control manager under the then managing director was C.E.O. Shepherd, who was Trinidadian but married to a Grenadian. So there's a part of history that Richard Menyes, I think, is probably 10 years older than I am. We call him Richard. He's a good friend of mine. And he evolved from there. As a matter of fact, I was telling Anya, he also had an interest in biking. And he organized biking where Huggins was the agent for Yamaha bikes. So from time to time, being next door to the motor department and the lumberyards in the carnage, you'll see him come across there trying to promote separately as an extra stint of his job, most likely as a credit control manager. So he promoted Yamaha bikes, and of course the promotion involved a number of sessions around the island. After that, I was promoted, and I think at that time Leslie Pear was the deputy, the late Leslie Pear was the deputy managing director. And in 1973, T. Geddes Grant bought out the majority of shares of George F. Huggins, which George F. Huggins was formally established in 1920 by Huggins out of Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, if you look at the mercantile sector class, 1920s, the Hubbards around that time, based again on the agricultural sector. These companies were mainly got involved in Grenada and some of the other islands because of the shipping of not tobacco, but cocoa and bananas and nutmegs. So you had the agricultural sector producing and sending away. So there's a vacuum, and that is where, let's say, and I'm quite sure that the doc will follow up on that history of the mercantile sector coming from the plantocrats, as I used to be used a term by. And then when Geddes Grant came on board, J. Menyes was promoted to the divisional manager of the retail division, which is now known as where courts is. That whole section had about 6 or 7 departments. And there's a guy director called E.T. Fenty, who was responsible for the agricultural division starting up, and also the text gas. And he was on the verge of going on retirement. And Ronald Lashley, who was my manager, who was given the option to be a division manager, indicated that he actually is the one who nominated me to take over the agricultural division from E.T. Fenty. And thereon I moved to the retail division. But I'll leave it here before we get to the exciting part. So that but it's 1970, and from there on I knew Richard Menyes from that time.
And you've established that you yourself were young. Mr. Menyes was young.
Right,
How was he as he ascended through the chain of Huggins? How was he accepted when he finally became CEO in terms of the business community, the people around at that time? What was the climate like?
Well, within the company, there are always politics within businesses.
Right.
And Richard Menes, who had only come in 4 or 5 years ago, they were directors, and like me, they were people who have worked in Huggins for many, many years, who contributed vastly to the growth and involvement of Huggins as it is now. So we have to look back. Many people, many stalwarts. I mean, I could think of Walter St. John, who is still alive. I met Walter St. John there. You can think of, late Leslie Pierre, Roll Charles, who came over from Geddes Grant, and so on. So, Raymond Isaac. There are many stalwarts in Huggins who contributed to where Huggins has arrived now. Richard was young, energetic, very bright, and I think the T. Geddes Grant takeover, who had their main office was in Jamaica, and there's a guy called Roy Callista, who was English, and there was another one from Guyana, Gomes. Their perception and vision was for younger people to evolve in the company. So they made that decisions based on their analysis of the vision. And yes, the politics, it was challenging for Richard himself and for me when I was promoted also, because you're promoting a younger person into the position within 7 years to managing director. So I knew the challenges, but at the same time Richard was promoted, I got a new Richard, and I also was promoted. So I took successive positions that he had, and actually my office was right out of G.A. Menes' office. And we worked closely together. But it was challenging, but I think the vision of then Roy Callista and Gomes was very visionary. And because of the youthfulness of G.A. Menes and his vision, Huggins evolved further. And his compassionate disposition and humanitarian disposition helped keep the staff, despite the fact that he was getting, and that's normal, problems from other companies, the Hubbardses, the Hankies, where's this young person going? Because he would have been about 30 or 32. Yeah, 32, very young, well, younger than Anya. And so there was a hue and cry within and out. How come? But he succeeded, and he was able to enlarge in the company. And as a matter of fact, in 1976, I played a role because we talk about the Continental Milling Corporation. His vision was, and he liked agriculture. He liked he always used to say, I like to take care of chickens. I remember, and the Carbon Agro, as you know it now, was the vision of Richard Menes, of where Huggins had 49% shares. So I was involved as head of the agricultural division and being responsible for Farm and Garden Center, which was established too. So that is where the flour mill came in. I did the statistics for the flour mill under his wing, the feeds and so on. And then we established the flour mill. There was a lot of political hue and cry from the administration of the GLP that the flour and feed mill should be placed somewhere else. It should have been either placed in a country where land was owned by somebody. Right. And so it took a couple of years. And then other people indicated it should be in Beauchajou. Pretty good idea. So there was a lot of challenges. And then we also had the independence during that time, and the Bloody Mondays and the Bloody Sundays. And so it was challenging in every sense. Politically for Menes as the then managing director, and for myself too, because I saw everything happening there. And that's even prior to the revolution. But as I wish to say, I worked with Richard for 40 years right under his wing. There are sometimes we disagreed on policies, but he was one of my mentors. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And Dr. Phillip-Dowe, I see you shaking your head. I know Mr. Joseph is corroborating a lot of your research there. You might have to co-opt him into some sessions. But you have written extensively about the period. What do you think were some of the enduring legacies of Huggins in the decades to follow? How did they evolve within the context of the decades that followed and in that period?
Okay. Good morning to everybody. On the insistence of Anya and Najuma, I am here. Looking at what I'd just like to give is just a little snapshot of what 1920 would have looked like for Grenada at the time. Huggins is coming into a post-World War I situation. And like most businesses starting around that time, it would have been rocky. When Huggins comes in, it comes in, and there are at least two other companies, a little older, because Hubbard's would have started 1810. They have their legacy as far back as 1810, and McIntyre Brothers, 1895. So it's coming at a time when there are other businesses there. Mr. Joseph mentioned Hankey's. Hankey's was the big business at the time, and Hankey's would have been into the cocoa, nutmeg selling of those things. So Huggins is coming in at a time when it's starting to do that as well. So it's going to be competing with the major business power at the time. Grenada 1920, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. We're looking at an economy that's basically agrarian. So it's cocoa, it's nutmeg, it's bananas. There's no manufacturing industries really. The politics of the time is one of asking for self-government from Britain. So there's agitation, but it's not that bad yet. We haven't got to the major agitation yet. But very quiet agitation through newspapers and that sort of thing. And it's coming at a time when Grenada is, just to give an example, the postal service, the communication at the time was post office.
Right.
And a vehicle is moving to take post from one part of the country to the next. And if it can't, it's basically a boat that has to move to take things, simple things that we take for granted now. It's coming at a time when there's about 150 private vehicles on the road. That's the reality of Grenada at the time. It's coming at a time when pipe-borne water is just coming in standpipes to the rural areas. It's in St. George's, it's in Grand Anse, but it's just coming into the other areas. So that is the kind of, electricity comes to St. George's in 1928. So that's the kind of, just a snapshot of the 1920s that Huggins is coming into. It's buying a company from Martin Dean and Company, which existed it started in 1889, so it's taken over from them and changing a bit because it's moving into the agricultural industry. What's interesting, I find, is that for a company to last for 100 years is basically a phenomenal achievement, because Grenada has one of the most colorful histories, as you know, in the Caribbean. So to be able to steer that course for that period of time while the history changes, because by the 1940s, 20 years after they're in business, 39 to 45, you have World War II. And the cream of the crop of Grenada's young people are moving off to war. That war also works to the advantage in the sense that there's no need for nutmegs. So Huggins has a little advantage here in this war period. But in post-war, you may have some instances of decline, as everybody would have faced, after 1945. Then moving on into the 60s, into the 70s, when Mr. Moniz comes on the scene, and Grenada is in trouble in the 1970s. A lot of turmoil and confusion. And how do you keep a business running at a time of that amount of turmoil and that amount of conflict would have been difficult, to say the least.
Right.
And then moving out of that again into a period of revolution with uncertainty, because there's a difference of a change now in ideologies, from an ideology that says private enterprise is okay and fine to one that says we're thinking more along the lines of public enterprise. So it's a shift. And how does a business deal with that sort of shift? So when I listen to Mr. Joseph speak about Mr. Moniz coming in as a young person, it would have been extremely challenging coming in 1974 and having to see Grenada through turmoil, pre-independence, socialist revolution, invasion, intervention. It's quite a lot to have dealt with at that point in Grenada's history. It's actually quite fascinating to see how our history on one side and trying to trying to build a business on the other must have been extremely difficult, very challenging. So it's one of the things to be celebrated that Huggins has gotten this far, 100 years later, to look back and say, we have really done it. It's actually very, very, very amazing and to be complimented.
And a testimony to some of the people sitting around this very
Definitely,
table.
definitely.
Excellent. All right, so I will come back to you, Dr. Dowe, and I want to go to Mr. Lahey now. So from the Texaco Games, right, Whitsuntide Sports, Grenada National Netball Team, private primary school sports, support for local athletes, Kirani James's historic Olympic win, Grenada's decathlete duo, Kurt Felix, Lyndon Victor. You, an avid sportsman yourself, what can you say about Huggins' legacy in supporting sports in Grenada? And how did that come about, so to speak, under your tenure? How did Huggins become so closely aligned with sports in this country? I'll let you start there and then follow on from that.
Well, good morning to the panelists. Good morning and so on. I'm sorry you asked me to speak because I would have listened to Ken and Dr. Phillip for the rest of the day and have nothing to say, and I would have been very comfortable.
Well, I think you can buy Dr. Phillip's book when it comes out.
But having said that, okay, my association with Huggins started in 1977. I started to work with him in 77. But as was mentioned, I was involved with the Football Association in the 70s, early 70s, played basketball, and I knew Huggins as sponsoring a basketball team. I'm talking about now 1973, probably around there, called Huggins Magicians, and basketball was then played on the back street school court, where all the buildings in Tonga and old and mash up now and nobody doing anything about it. So you really can't point to where we started. But there's a steel band there, what's his name there, Dimensions used to play there. And the police there was a health and strength club inside there. And anyhow, we used to play basketball there. And it was very good. The place used to be filled with people watching basketball. And we had a team, Huggins Magicians. Subsequent to that, I think they sponsored, they sponsored a netball team, which was the top team in Grenada and one of the top teams in the Caribbean, Huggins United. And some of the people are still around, Vida Bruno, what's her name, June Salab, Hercules, Michelle Hercules, and then played for that team. Incidentally, Huggins Magician. So they were involved in sport in the 70s, I know. I know about way back, further back then, because I don't think there was a lot of the national sports team in those days never really got a lot of contribution from the companies. I knew that when teams had to travel, cricket teams, for instance, going to play Winner Islands tournament, the day before they leave, or on the day they're leaving by boat to go to St. Vincent, they still don't know who the team is. And if somebody could come and pay the passage and go, they are the Grenada team and they're gone. There wasn't a kind of vision to sponsor a national team in those days. And so it was a constant scrambling for teams participating, Grenada participating in football. As a matter of fact, there was no real regional competition in sport, except the Winner Islands football competitions, Popham Cup, and then the cricket competitions. But we never played Trinidad, we never played Barbados, we never played St. Lucia, we won't play. But we used to go down to Southern Games in Trinidad, track and field, and participate. I was in the 60s and 70s, and probably in the 50s too, I don't know. But in terms of Huggins' contribution to sport, it has been, in my lifetime, quite substantial. And even going up to the present time, where they, as one of the big firms in the island, contribute to sport, because I suppose it's a social, corporate
social
social responsibility.
Right.
And I don't know how hard it was to get the money out of them, but they certainly, they certainly have made a contribution to sport development over the years.
And I guess you as a sportsman, as you mentioned.
And let me make a correction. I wasn't a sportsman.
Yeah.
Or a sports administrator. Is a big difference.
Okay, let me say, you as a man in sports.
In sport.
You must have felt a certain pride working for the company, knowing and seeing that they support sports and have given back to so much to sports in the country.
Certainly. As I said, I started in 78. When I was 78, I was in which association? Football Association. And, I used to use the company's vehicle. I started working in the garage. And the garage was on Market Hill. You all know Market Hill? And there was a little building in the garage. I think Maitland bought it over and started a little mall there. So this is where I started. So there's no parking, so you had to park the vehicles on the garage, on the hill. But there weren't many vehicles in Ireland at the time. I shouldn't say. So there was, and people didn't used to park on that hill because that hill was too steep to park. So they were finding parking around the place. Now, if you drive over the hill, there's no parking. I suppose the cars have better brakes and so on. But see, I remembered when we were there parking, and rain fell. A fellow would come and say, "Mr. Lahey, look at a car sliding down the hill, because the car, the traction thing they do, and it's coming down here the road, and put a stone to block the car from coming down the hill." But we were there, and I said, I started in Huggins there, and from the time I started with in Huggins, Mr. Miniz, I never called him Richard. Mr. Miniz or the chief. At the end of the time, it was the chief, although we're similar age and so on. He always had a vision to move the garage, get a better facility. So Huggins had a piece of property where Fulham is there now. And we went there and we looked at it, and his vision was to first of all put the garage there. You remember Trinidad, we went with George Williamson, he drew up the late George Williamson, drew up preliminary plans for a garage where Fulham is. But that went by the wayside and so on, and then because he started with sometime, what year was by right started? In 74. So 74, so he had by right, the garage by right. By right started in the, of course, where Foodland Market Square is now. And then his vision was to have a bigger supermarket, so we went over there. And subsequently, he bought the land for where motor division is now. They're from DMB Cromwell, I think. He didn't buy more. He should have bought more, but he didn't buy more land. It's funny about business and so on, because you buy this piece of land and you feel you have a lot of land. And then you realize now that we are the only people down there, eh? And then you realize after 10 years.
Bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
But hindsight is 20/20 vision. But up to that point, it has been a enjoyable period of time working for Huggins. I don't want to talk about different things with Mr. Miniz yet, but I suppose that would come in time.
Well, we certainly will open the floor, and I'm sure
for memories.
We're going to go to Mrs. Chow Chung, and I'm sure once she starts, it's going to bring back a lot of different things. So far, we have heard the wide-ranging history of Huggins in terms of coming into the market and since the early 20s and developing over time and staying the course, as was said. 100 years is a long time by any stretch. I mean, if the West Indies could make 100 as often as you have, we would be doing very well right now. But, we've had a few. We had a few. I mean, we had a few. I don't want to start up the man in sports, okay? But so Mrs. Chow Chung, from revolution to pandemic, I mean, you have been watching in the wings, in the shadow of a giant figure of a CEO. You've been thoroughly prepared. You've worked your way through the ranks of the company. And now you sit at the helm of one of Grenada's largest and oldest, and probably the biggest 100% locally owned business conglomerate in the island. I mean, what are you feeling now 100 years? I mean, this must be a very poignant moment for you, facing similar challenges as a young CEO, similar to your predecessor. What are your thoughts in this period of time?
Well, good morning, Mr. Keynes Douglas, again. And good morning, of course, to our panelists. And thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of this session this morning. If you'll permit me, you are quite correct in saying that this is quite a poignant moment. I was preparing for this discussion, you know, but actually being here and hearing, I mean, I've had many conversations with Mr. Joseph. Dr. Dowe was teaching at the St. Joseph's Convent as a very young girl at the time, and she was my form mistress. And of course, I've been to the school of Sir Royston, as we call him, you know. So these panelists here, as you rightly put earlier, so integral to Huggins's history, one way or another, you know, and we are really and truly a product of our history, a product of the people in our history. Because, I mean, she doesn't know this, but she was one of my favorite teachers. And from then, I saw Dr. Dowe's passion for history, you know. So hearing Huggins placed in the context of Grenadian history this morning, how do I feel? I feel small. And that's the only way I can put it. When you hear of what these individuals and those others who have gone before us, what you hear of what Mr. Menes navigated through, right? It brings me home to the fundamental point I always make. Unless you have humility as one of your guiding principles in business, in sports, in history, in entrepreneurship, in everything that you do in life, unless you have humility, you will be destined to fail. And I think that is one of the main reasons why Huggins has endured. Humble leadership and visionary leadership. You know, I don't know if if it's hereditary, but certainly when I took the reins, as did Mr. Menes. I mean, I don't know if many people know this, but on the day he was appointed CEO, it was in the midst of the troubles of 1974, right? And I've told this story a few times, and I don't know that wider Grenada knows this story. But Mr. Menes there were riots on the Carronage, and he was securing the building because the section of the motor department was then on the Carronage, and he was up on top securing windows and battening down. This is in the midst of the riots. And somebody walks up to Mr. Menes and says, Mr. Menes, can I have a moment of your time? I'm so sorry, but your father has just passed away. You know? And knowing the gentleman as well as I do, I'm 41 years old, I've gone public, you know? But I think I've been schooled by this gentleman from birth, you know? I was born into Teddy's diapers, you know, which Huggins sold, you know? Mr. Joseph will know that. But the first thing he did, he made sure that the business was secured, right? Of course, my mom was at home. Of course, my grandmother was there with his dad. And then he went home. He called Mr. Bailey at the point in time, and they came and he dealt with his dad. But can you imagine what he was dealing with at that point in time? You talk about adversity, you know, and then now, 2017, I take over as CEO, and I'm in the midst of my own trials and the loss of my husband, you know, and if nothing else, unless you are able to embrace adversity and unless you understand and appreciate, right, that this company, the people who work for this company are so much bigger than you are, then and only then you'll be able to navigate these times of trials. And I think this pandemic this pandemic has really brought out the best in the current complement of directors and managers and staff members at Huggins. It has brought out the best. The creativity. We have really come together to navigate the trial, you know. So while it's a devastating experience, you know, I don't think anyone is immune in Grenada to what's going on at the present time. At the same time, it has brought out the best in some of us.
You brought up something very interesting. I mean, we know that Huggins is about 80% owned by the employees. What do you think went into that decision, and what was the vision at the time to make 100%, and the other 20% we know is Grenadian owned? So the claim that Huggins can make of being 100% locally owned. Tell us about maybe the watershed moment that occurred and that your dad took on the reins, and why he felt it was so important to go in that direction.
Mr. Joseph and Dr. Dowe alluded to the fact that Huggins' history has been was one of foreign ownership up to 1998. Originally, of course, you know, I mean, Sir George F. Huggins was Vincentian by birth, I understand, but made his name in Trinidad and came to Grenada, purchased Martin Dean and Company. As a matter of fact, Dr. Dowe, you'll find very interestingly, we have the original minutes from 1920. The actual original document is framed in our lobby here, so I would love to share that with you, you know. You have the advent of the T. Geddes Grant Group in 1973. Again, correct, headquartered in Jamaica. A lot of English leadership there. And of course, Mr. Menes had to report to Barbados. We were then under Barbados. And Guyana. So it would have been Tony Gomes, and I believe it was Walter Short in Barbados.
And Roy Callister.
Roy Callister was the head honcho, so to speak, you know.
So he was an employee, actually.
He was an employee, you know, and
We were employees.
we were employees, right? And you had to, your profits are expatriated, you know, because of course, your dividends would have to be paid over to headquarters. You have to report, and I remember the trials of those reporting. You would know Mr. Lahey, Mr. Joseph would have been part of that reporting process. And if you didn't report, you know, and ad nauseum. And I mean, rightly so. You want to keep, you know, abreast of the business and so on. But it was really a task. And then from the T. Geddes Grant ownership days, you had the advent of the Neil and Massey ownership. So Neil and Massey bought over the T. Geddes Grant Group. That was in 1993, if I'm not mistaken. So again, Huggins became part of the largest conglomerate in the Caribbean, which is Neil and Massey, now Massey. You know, and again, you have to look at the positives, the ups and downs in all things, you know. And I think what Mr. Menes enjoyed was the friendships that he made along the way. You know, you have to, I mean, we can't divorce ourselves from the downside of our history, you know, and the politics and the favoritism that was given to people of certain cultures. I don't want to go too deep into the issues, you know, because these are very sensitive issues at the time. But Mr. Menes was always, even in his days at the bank, Mrs. Menes will tell you this, he always stood up on the right side. He fought for equality for workers. He fought for justice. He fought for the right thing. He led a strike at Royal Bank, right? Because the West Indian workers were treated differently to the workers from the UK and from Canada, right? They were given lower salaries, lower standards of living, and this is what he fought for in his tenure there at the bank. And similarly, he became very good friends with the eventual CEO of Neil Massey. He was then head of their motor division. God rest his soul, Mr. Bernard Doolal Whiteway. And Bernard Doolal Whiteway was not one of the favored. I suppose he came from very humble beginnings himself. But he was bright and he was a hard worker. Mr. Menes was the only person who stood in favor when the time came to change the leadership at the helm of Massey. Mr. Menes was saying, this is the man you have to forget where he come from, forget. This is the man you have to appoint. And they became very good friends. And I'm making all these points to tell you how sometimes paths cross. And I believe, if you want to call it destiny, you want to call it the universe, I believe in the wonderful power of God. And Huggins, I mean, imagine after working for decades for a company, you hear through the grapevine that Huggins is up for sale, Huggins Grenada. The uncertainty, I mean, after pouring so much in, you don't know where your destiny is headed. And I remember that being a very difficult time at home. And one day, Mr. Menes was summoned to a meeting in Trinidad. And the would-be purchaser was in the room. And I would love to share, perhaps one day, when I might write my own book, Dr. Dow, you know? But I will only call it a miracle. The person walked away from the deal. And Mr. Whiteway said to Mr. Menes, well, you've always been harassing me because you've always expressed that you would like to make George F. Huggins and Company, Grenada Limited, truly Grenadian in every sense of the word. And he said, let's go. And in an unprecedented, Mr. Lahi, an unprecedented financial maneuver, let's call it that. Legal, eh? I know you all know this word maneuver has connotations. Quite legal, quite legal. Mr. Menes and his team at the point in time negotiated the purchase of George F. Huggins and Company, Grenada Limited, and the emancipation of the company from its foreign ownership. And so that was in 1998. And the decision was taken because I think, again, Mr. Menes had very certain principles he held very dear. And he was a very fair man in his during his tenure, a very fair man. And he decided that there were so many people who had brought Huggins to the stage it was. As you rightly said, that was a watershed and defining moment for the company. And he decided, well, okay, there was a holding company that purchased the company, and shares in that holding company were given in a rights issue, free of cost, to members of staff. This was not only management, but general staff who had had a certain tenure with the company, who had had a certain commitment in terms of their number of years of service. So free shares were issued in Huggins, and that is why today Huggins is still 80% owned by staff. Some have retired, but 80% owned by its staff. The remaining 20%, there was a prospectus issued, and Grenadians were offered to purchase shares in the company. And that's how Huggins today stands as a 100% Grenadian. I like to say a flagship. A flagship.
Great. Mm-hmm. So 100 years later, 50 of those years would have been under Mr. Menes' watch, so to speak, and now under your stewardship. And I know you would have had countless conversations with Mr. Menes before the actual transition to the role you're in today. But what are some of the things you want to say to him in terms of the company that he left in your care?
Mr. Keane-Douglas, that's a very, very difficult thing. I don't think another century would be enough to say what I would like to say to Mr. Menes, you know. But I have to make an important point here, right? Mr. Menes, yes, he served Huggins for 50 years, but Mrs. Menes still continues to serve this company. And I mean, I was so happy to hear when Mr. Joseph, you know, mentioned her, because you cannot divorce Mr. Menes' tenure from Mrs. Menes' tenure, right? Mr. Lahi? Or Mrs. Lahi's tenure, or Mrs. Joseph's tenure.
I'm laughing because just last week I passed her packing the shelves at
That's
Foodland.
right. She's still packing the shelves at Foodland today, and I don't think there's a Foodland customer who doesn't know that Mrs. Menes still, you know, she lives and breathes Foodland, but she has Huggins so many years, and through it all, Mr. Menes didn't just navigate these difficult waters on his own. When he got home on an afternoon, he came home to someone he can speak to, someone he can run ideas by, someone he can trust, someone who stood shoulder to shoulder with him on the journey, you know. So I would like to say to Mr. Menes, apart from his, without question, remarkable half-century at Huggins, I want to say to him and Mrs. Menes, simply thank you. Because of their example, not their words. They led by example at home, and they lived what they believed in their professional lives. And I'm a firm believer that there's no greater gift that you can give to your children, to your employees, to your colleague directors, than that of a good reputation. Because it paves the way for so many things to follow. Trust in business, loyalty of customers, respect of your peers and your colleagues. And of course, I studied, it's so, Dr. Dow, you see so many of us at the table have been products of the University of the West Indies. God's blessing to have gone to that institution. Because when I was studying overseas, again, the upside of the legacy relationships with Geddes Grant and Neil and Massey, the folks I met there in Barbados and Trinidad while I studied. Well, you are Mr. Menes's relative, and I was treated, I had people I can call upon, because in business, you make friends, you make colleagues, and you build relationships with your customers. And I think that's what I just simply to Mr. Menes, thank you.
Goodwill.
Yes.
Goodwill. Goodwill.
Mm-hmm. And I think it is clear, to customers, to staff, that those tenets are still at play today that you mentioned, upright dealings, honesty in business, family, locally owned, protecting your own, standing up for what is right. We've heard some of those tough decisions that were taken, and more tough decisions are still to come. Mm-hmm. You talked about the pandemic teaching you to look at, to hold on to those things. And the staff have certainly risen to the challenge. We've seen you, at the forefront, the front lines of the pandemic, whether it's at the supermarket, whether it's talking to your customers from big to small. So how do you think it's changed your leadership style, having endured these sort of tests and this current test that we're in? What are some of the changes that you yourself have had to make?
Salahi, I don't think, maybe I could ask you that question. Do you think that my leadership style has changed? I don't know that it has.
Your leadership style was a short period.
Exactly.
Out of my 41 years, it was 2 years, 3 years.
Right. That's right.
But it's changed from your father. I think you're trying to find your way. You've been mentored by your father. You worked with him, with Mr. Menes for a while before as his personal assistant, it was. Yeah. That would have given you a lot of insight into the workings of the company. Nobody could have gotten a better education in terms of managing the company than you did. With it's 10 years or 8 years you spent with him.
In total, about 14 years.
About 14 years working along with him and so on. So when you were appointed as CEO, you would have had the advantage of how the company ran, the problems of the company, and who to deal with, who to talk to. You would have been meeting people who were involved with him along the way, the Bernard Julia Whiteways and all of them there, you would have been involved with them. And so your preparation as CEO, that's why we put you there too,
I will hasten to add to the moderator that
there was nobody else to put.
Yeah. Well, gee, thank you, Mr. Lahi. I really appreciate the compliment. But what Mr. Lahi says is true. But when I assumed the position of CEO, despite the fact that I had been under Mr. Menes's tutelage for so many years, I decided that it was time to truly test who we were. And I remember calling a meeting of the senior management committee. We meet on a regular basis, you know. And I asked the management committee to identify what are the core values, what core values they believed Huggins stood for. And of course, everyone spoke about the integrity and the honesty and the, forthrightness in business and this and that. And I said, are we? Are we really people of integrity? Do we see, and I mean, we took it down to brass tacks, because integrity is not only making sure that your customs invoices are proper, and that you pay your taxes, and that you are open to any sort of audit. You know, it's not only financial integrity, right? But it is ensuring that if you are given a task as a manager, it's executed to the nth degree. As a manager, do I treat my employees the way I would like to be treated? Do I take to heart criticism and seek to do better? All of that is integrity. All of that is integrity. So we sat, and I think at the outset of my tenure, I was clear on what my expectations were, but more importantly, what it is we expected, what it is the team expected of my leadership. It's a two-way conversation, eventually leading to a one-way journey, because we have to be moving in the same direction. You know, so if you don't test these values in their truest sense, then and only then, you would never be able to endure. And I think this is what you asked the question earlier, I would like to see us do to assure us of another century of service. It's time for introspection, right? And everything else, the customers will feel what you are doing internally to shore up your integrity. That's my take on it.
And I think we have seen that because the staff have certainly rallied around you and the other management, senior managers in the business during this global pandemic. Whether it be walking the lines, making sure customers were, shaded from the sun, when we had those lengthy hours and restrictions, and offering drinks and water, and just small things that show that they're all part of a bigger family, a bigger picture, and the staff, of course, I think have embraced some of those very tenets that you're talking about. One of the things that has come out in this pandemic period, of course, as many people begin to feel the pinch, I'm sure, Mr. Joseph, we have a lot of, big business entrepreneurs around the table. You hear the cry of, protect the small man, and small business, support small business, and big businesses have deep pockets and they're going to survive this period, and, but it's the small guy that needs to be, supported. I mean, what do you see when you're faced with that sort of thing on the road? And either one of you could jump in here.
I would like to. That's a very pertinent question. But let me just, before I get to there,
right,
and talk about the social consciousness of the Huggins group, more so when G.M. Menis took over. And Anya alluded to the humility of Menis and herself. And this is where I also came from, because I learned to go along with that. The training under Huggins is in itself a university, and it's a family. The symbol of Huggins, Sir Joseph Huggins, the foundation of that symbol and the logo, tells it all. It's a team effort. And that has been inculcated within the management, even from my time. And I say that's how it evolves. And if you have that foundation of the team spirit, the social consciousness of the leader, then of course the rest of the team will follow and support. And despite, there always would be people who would be at the sidelines knocking away to try to break up that team. And I remember, as Anya spoke about, even with regards to Richard Menis and the carnage on that day in 1974. He was at one building, motor department. I was at the carnage in the lumber department, securing the lumber department, when the mass of people, as a matter of fact, they did eventually break the motor vehicle showroom with the cars there. And I was on the other side being responsible. I was also responsible for security of all the buildings at one time. So I was in the Carnage, and I let in a few people in the lumber yard. It was a lumber yard then. About a dozen or a few people when everything broke out. And I heard when the glass windows was broken, but Richard had already got the information about his dad, you know. And it was team effort from then as how to secure the premises of Huggins, led by him then. And he was not managing director, but he was responsible for that area in 1974, I think. Yes, he was. He was on the verge of getting into the managing directorship. But it is that legacy. It is that, I mean, if you hear people from outside, the customers who speak about Huggins, the staff who sell, 90% of the staff who sell the story about treated fairly. And I remember I moved, let me tell you something. I'm a worker. I started at Huggins at $120 a month, you know. At 18, I mean, at age 18, a clerk in the bar. That's what I started at. And because of the openness of Richard and the management then, you know, I moved within 2 years to $2,000 a month. You understand? Larry could have spoken about that. At that time, Huggins were agents and they just lost the agency for Austin, Leyland Motors.
Yes.
And Huggins was scrambling as to what agency to replace, and that's where Datsun came in. They applied for the Datsun dealership. And I remember Bertie Shepherd driving old Austin. And I think Richard must have taken over that because, you know, managing directors and directors at that time, there were about 3 or 4 who had companies cars. Under many years, it spread where directors and divisional managers and who are staff were given the opportunity to have cars at that level. So by the time I was on the board of management, and I was 26, and I became on the board of management at meetings with directors and stalwarts like Leslie Pierrot, Charles and so on who came from Julian's. Through Richard's liberal, you know, taking care of staff. And that is why the staff at management will support Anya. You know, company cars were allotted for these B or management or divisional managers. And that is, and which means less, at that time, less money or dividends going out to the foreign shareholders. I wanted to tell Anya that in 1997, when I heard Neil and Matthew was about to put, I was outside of Huggins, but I still within Huggins because I employed, there are people who I employed myself who are still within Huggins. And I said, if that Huggins going to go to another company, I attempted actually to buy Neil and Massey shares on the outside. That's how ambitious I was, but also for the sake of keeping it as a Grenadian company, like-minded like Richard. Not knowing how they would have been able to do it because it acquired a lot of money, but also it acquired close contact and relationships to be able to get into Huggins and board the shares. I mean, I own a few shares in Huggins when it was open out to it.
Yeah.
So the best thing happened to Huggins. It is a local company. It comes back to the question that you asked with regards to the small man. Most of the entrepreneurs who are there on their own also have to be trained. And if you're well trained under a company like Huggins and the other companies likewise, where the integrity, auditing, being fair to your staff, sharing some of it indirectly, profit sharing, but giving your staff, you're going to build an organization and you're going to build entrepreneurs who leave to develop small businesses on their own, like myself, to start from small. And with the same philosophy, with the same training, so that you could hand it down to your staff and your workers. So not just the financial integrity, as the moral integrity, how you treat the staff, the social integrity, how your staff, and all that, if it is done by most companies, then your small entrepreneur develop that, the country will be better off because they will gain their adequate taxes, fair taxes, because that is how I was trained at Huggins, so that when the government, Inland and Revenue, or the Minister of Finance, it gets Huggins or Hubbards or those come, you all know you're going to get your fair share of taxes. And that is what has to be inculcated in most of the businesses, so that your country will benefit, your workers will benefit. And the monies will stay within the country. And as you see, Huggins has evolved, it has put in money. I was there when Bayreuth was formed. I was the divisional manager of Huggins Distribution, which was one of the most militant during the revolution, the most militant staff, to the extent that I sat outside Manny's office, and one time I saw a whole uproar because the staff left and closed down Huggins Distribution during a certain period, and they were marching to Mr. Manny's, who was the only person who would have listened to him, to them. They just left it. The manager then of the department looked outside to call for staff. So I gathered to send the vans out, only to see there were no vans on the premises. The staff took all the vans because they were against him for whatever reason, and they marched down to Richard Manny's. and Huggins Distribution was closed. You didn't know that story?
I did not know that story.
I was there.
Sure, I know who was involved. And he sits on the board today. Mr. David and team.
No, David. No. David was one of my employees. As a matter of fact, it was because of me, David kind of evolved. But I'm saying that the person who was there died. He's no longer there. But they left there, everybody. Because during that part of the revolution, they were very militant. And unions were involved. The revolutionary fervor, which many people call me, but you're quasi-socialist, you know. But there was a lot of challenges, as you said. But the small businessmen, I think, are suffering in the same context because of, for instance, I'm sorry to prolong this, and I made to make this point. The entrepreneur and the business entrepreneur in our countries, in Grenada, under this COVID situation, and the employers in the private sector and small entrepreneurs are suffering the most. When you look at certain institutions, whether it's a government service, and I can say so, the civil servants are insulated for salaries. Most of the banking sectors are insulated, and I need to say this, so their salaries are untouched. You have 8,000 public servants who are getting full salaries, and no politician is touching that easy. None, because there's a block of votes. But you got 48,000 employees and business people. A busman is a business person. Small shops are business people. The hairdressers and all these people. They are entrepreneurs. They have to be considered in the holistic operation of private sector. So Huggins have a block of 500 odd workers which are employees within the private sector. And because of their team and their strength, they have been able to, I think, keep their full staff so far. If that goes out, it is because of their strength and their team effort. Right. But the small businessmen are suffering because of not the inequalities of the just started business, but they're not insulated. Yeah. So in fact, within even the whole of the Caribbean and in Grenada, private sector workers and small entrepreneurs are suffering. Yeah. And they are the ones that have to be given the support by whichever government more so. Right. And that is a concern that I personally have. Yeah.
Yeah. If I could jump in though, and I don't know if Dr. Dowe could jump in here as well, because I think it's important. No. I want to. You made a very valid point. Yes. I may not necessarily disagree, but perhaps I need to put an addendum to what you're saying. Yes. And I don't know if Dr. Dowe could give us a little insight as to how our economy evolved from being an agricultural economy, and the relevance of the small businesses as the years evolved, because I do not see the small businesses and larger businesses as mutually exclusive. And this is where I take issue with one thing you said. Larger businesses are not insulated. Right?
No, we are government.
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
Government.
Okay, so then there's an addendum to what you say. I did qualify that part. Okay. But larger businesses, right? We are as strong as our small businesses and our entrepreneurs are. So I think Dr. Dowe maybe could elaborate on the importance of small business, you know, in the historical context. But I will step in after that and make another point.
I see the wheels of Dr.
The wheels.
Dowe's brain turning there. And I get some points from what both of you have said. Big businesses start small, as you've said. A lot of big businesses have started small.
Sir George F. Huggins.
Right.
His first business was selling apples on the side of the road. He was barefooted when he went to school.
So
That
I
is
think
where
that's
Huggins
an important
started.
point
That's
to
important
remember. We already said that Huggins is 100% locally owned, and most of 80% of that is by the staff. So when you have a company like a Huggins, when you support Huggins, you're supporting the staff of Huggins. There's 500 people with their families and knock-on effects.
Right.
These people shop in the community stores. They spend their money in the market. They do things, buy fish in the fish market. So you cannot view all big business as insulated. Huggins is a business that is large, but it is made up of many elements, including staff who play a significant role in the company, and it's how its profits and how it rises and falls. So I think that's what I gathered. But I'll come back to to Dr. Dowe, because I think the wheels look like they are set.
A devil's advocate question you asked.
Okay. Grenada would have, like most of the region, been predominantly agricultural. The movements into service sector would have been probably mid to late 60s, starting moving slowly into the tourism, in particular, tourism industry. And very slowly, of course, because of our size, so that movements in the tourism industry, even though it starts in the 60s, would have favored the larger islands. And then, of course, having the disadvantage of having a small airport would have put us on the back burner quite a bit until we moved to international airport by the early mid-80s. So building around the tourism industry, you have a lot of smaller businesses coming around because of the tourism industry. So you have building of the tourism industry, yes, into the hotels. My husband is going to comment on this, but SGU as biggest tourism booster in Grenada as well. And it's not us, it really is, the reality is 20% of our GDP. And you're bringing hundreds of people into Grenada. So once that fleshes out, you have a supporting, almost called like a supporting staff around that. The taxi driver, the bus driver, the person who is in whether it is a small shop, whether it is a supermarket, whether it is the water taxi person, whether it's the person, everything builds around that industry. Grenada is not the only island that is basically seeing the adverse effects of COVID, because you now have that group of people no longer here. So how does that bus driver, that taxi driver, that person who, for example, their responsibility is just to pick up people from the airport and get them to where they're supposed to be going, as simple as that, but that is now feeding a family of how many? When you look at it from that point of view, you realize how devastating something like COVID is and the implications it can have for people. The fact of the matter is that sometimes governments can, sometimes they can't provide the necessary monies that's needed to boost that. Take into consideration that a government, when they made their budgets, they would have thought, okay, X is going here, Y is going there. And then you're hit with something like COVID. You now have to redirect whatever you plan to do to see how you can keep the economy running. And that is difficult. Right. It's difficult to do, because you have to try to meet the needs of everyone, not just the public sector, but also thinking about thinking about the private sector. So it's a very difficult position, and it's not something that the world has not faced before, just not in our lifetime. But it takes time, sometimes as much as 2 years, to get out of situations like this. Our last pandemic was 1918, and before that 1854 actually. So it takes time and patience, which obviously we don't have, because of course you want to see the benefits of what's happening now. But it's difficult, but at the same time, just getting a little bit back to what you were mentioning about big businesses as opposed to small business. You looking at Huggins as a big business and they're fine. You have to take in terms of what you just mentioned. This company is now part owned by its owners, and that affects the broader community. Right. Yeah, and we have to look at it in those terms. And it's phenomenal that Huggins would have taken that step so long ago. And you can see the effects of it now, because it's now, in a time like this, it has a positive effect on the rest of the Grenadian community.
No doubt. It is definitely a very delicate dance from the government's perspective of what they need to do, and also from private sector in terms of, I think Mr. Joseph mentioning, keeping your employees employed and ensuring that their benefits and so remain protected during these kind of times. And I know that's something that must be keeping Mrs. Chow Chung up at nights, and when I started to do my research into Huggins for this role and my association with them in recent times, and understanding I didn't realize how many places Huggins touches the lives of the average Grenadian person. And I don't think many people realize either, to be honest. We mentioned in the beginning that there's 17 divisions of George M. Huggins. Basically, that there's kind of like a Huggins for everything. So I don't know if Mrs. Sheldon would touch on that, but I mean, whether you're talking, whether the man who's buying a little 20-pound gas cylinder, whether it is the restaurants and hotels who are getting 1,000 gallons, or whether it's you in the bigger apartment complexes with your 100-pound cylinders. I mean, they literally, from pharmaceuticals, farm and gardens, farmers in, farm outreach programs, automotive, I mean, insurance, I think there's just so many shipping. You mentioned taxi drivers, tours, Huggins Tours, AmeriJet. I mean, there are just so many knock-on multiplier effects of this company. And I think it should be every Grenadian's wish to see Huggins celebrate many more centuries, because their contribution, I think, has not even begun to be measured.
But it tells you the strength of Huggins over the years, and that's what I'm trying to have kept all these employees. And so Anya kind of didn't spoken about the insulation for the public sector from a political.
No, I understand totally now.
But the strength of Huggins to still have this 500 staff without laying off. I mean, you see what has happened to Liat. If Liat was run like a business, he would not have been in this problem.
Liat was run like a business, but it's what?
Run like Huggins then.
I want to talk about the insulation, because right now Huggins is an insulator for many of our small businesses. This is how we operate. You all hear me speak a lot about Huggins family, and I speak about the employees, right, and the customers. But there are businesses, small businesses, whose destiny is so intertwined with Huggins. A lot of Grenadians don't understand. We talk about, Dr. Phillip talked about the taxi drivers and the tour operators. To be able to offer a tour, for example, to a cruise line, no small tour operator can come to terms with the quantum of public liability insurance that you have to carry. At minimum, $5 million US, and they're pushing the limits higher, right? If you're operating, right, we are a major LPG supplier, right? We've been with Texaco, Chevron, we know with Ruby Gas, 60 years this year, right? But you have your hoteliers and your restaurants who have been closed. So as a company now, we have taken a decision to cut rates for LPG as a sort of relief package to these restaurants and these businesses. And that is something that we're going to be launching as part of our centennial program, right? You have to stand with those businesses who rely on you as the conduit, as the company which interfaces with the foreign principals, the goods on the shelves in the small shops, right? It is a pleasure for us to be able to go out. During COVID, Mr. Narayan and all the vans were on the road, servicing the small shops, right? Huggins provides that conduit for the shops. We have the credit arrangements, and in turn, more so than ever, the smaller businesses rely on us for more compassionate credit terms, right? So our future is so intertwined. We are just really a big small business. We're just really a big Grenadian small business. I mean, we started off selling apples, and we did not come to be the company we are today because we're lucky. It is because of individual entrepreneurs who have contributed to the history of Huggins. It is because of the teachers who educated us to become creative and visionary and talented so that we can build something. And what we are building here in Huggins is something truly Grenadian. And I'd love to keep it that way. You know, I would love to keep it that way. So this is my take on the smaller business, larger business discussion, at least in the Huggins context.
Right. So, I mean, I think we've covered from 1920 to 2020. So maybe tell, what is the next 100 years looking at? What do you think?
Well,
What?
I'll have to speak to my hairdresser. She might be able to determine what I might look like, you know, in the next 100 years. But certainly, especially in the context of this pandemic, right? Our vision has shifted. So whereas we had a medium and long-term objectives and strategic plan in terms of how we're going to expand the company and grow the company and provide more employment, etc., 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 that plan has had to have been shifted, and it has been the medium-term goals have now been shifted to short-term goals. Because if you're going to survive, you're going to have to survive in a contactless digital environment, right? I had a very interesting meeting with a customer yesterday, you know, and I learned so much from that half an hour, right? Because he was impacted by a young manager, right? Impacted by his ability to connect digitally, right, with his supplier. And it is something that, as I said, we had envisioned. We had already begun the process late last year. My director of IT, I don't know how he carries the burden, but he leads a very, very creative and innovative department. And Huggins's digital transformation is well underway. So I'm putting our customers on notice. I'm putting the panelists on notice. I may be able to appear digitally one day on your premises. I'm just kidding on that. I wouldn't invade your space. But suffice to say that it is about service, and more service to customers. And whether that means they're being able to contact you digitally, you being able to interact with them, the small businesses, the individual customers. This is where we have to head. And I don't think this is any secret.
Right.
This is what we have to embrace. The lessons from COVID also tell us about our future for the next 100 years. You know, and I want to thank the panelists here today, because we can only understand where we're headed if we understand our history. There are so many lessons to be learned from history, and ideas and concepts to be borrowed from and built upon. So that is where I see us in the next 100 years. I see, maybe not me, maybe Jamie, Dr. Dowe's son, right? Whoever.
Right.
At the helm of an entity that can say we are 200 years strong. And this is what Mrs. Chow Chung and her team did. And this is the legacy we are building for the next 100 years, you know? And then they will go back to Mr. Meniz and his legacy, and Mr. Joseph and Mr. Lahi, and they will tell all the jokes that Mr. Lahi told from 1977 to the current time.
But I love something that you said. in terms of Huggins being a big small business. And I think that's a really great concept, especially in the sense of, small businesses, as you've said, are often not able to meet the requirements of doing business on a larger scale. So Huggins brings that scale to the small business. And they also bring 100 years of expertise, of trust, of integrity that they can rely upon and use as a platform in which to launch their own entrepreneurial projects. I know you do a lot of work, as you mentioned, Huggins started in the agriculture business, and you're still out there working with farmers in terms of how to bring their produce to market better, how to work, and maybe even combining that with digital in terms of how to use digital solutions to improve the yield of agriculture. And I think those are some of the discussions that your IT people would be having, and around this table I see a lot of heads nodding, etc. So we kind of close to the end of this session. I know we want it to last all day, but we know everybody is busy, and very much appreciative of the panel taking the time to celebrate this significant milestone with George F. Huggins today. And I want to just go around and give each person sort of their final word in terms of, what you want to say at this junction, marking Huggins' centennial. Mr. Lahi, what would you say? What's on your mind now in terms of something you want to say at this junction?
Besides retirement.
Thanks for the retirement.
We still have
The journey with Huggins for me was quite an enjoyable one. I can't complain. There were some difficulties with it, but when you look at where we started, where the motor division came from, as was mentioned by Kent, they were selling vehicles, first of all, and where the coach building was, the vehicles were there. Then they started selling vehicles in the carnage. The garage was in the carnage. The vehicles were kept in Monge. So so here's one division. You come to buy a car, the person has to take it to Monge to see the car, come back in down on carnage and this kind of thing. And then the movement to consolidate everything into one and make it become one of the best automotive dealerships in the island. Because it wasn't just to consolidate it, but upgrade the equipment, upgrade the training, make it the best. Or one of the best in the island. So, and that was a journey that took place in my tenure there, and it's something I enjoyed, and I'm thankful for the experience. Thankful for the experience of working in the company, meeting some nice people like Miss Najuma, Francis, having an interaction with them, and but it has been good, and I think the company is in good hands, and despite the problems we may be facing, we will be able to handle it because of the training we've had, because of the history we've had. I think the staff will rise to the occasion and move the company forward. So I wish them all the best.
Great. And Dr. Phillip-Dowe, I mean, it's clear, I think you have seen that you have some very good resources around you, and I think Mrs. Chow Chung mentioned a certain filing cabinet in the office that you probably need to raid for some more source material. But I mean, from your perspective, what's your thoughts and final words here?
Okay, I need to just give a little personal experience. I remember as looking through the history of Huggins, I remember the building as it would have been before courts. I'm aging myself, but anyway. I remember going into that building with my mom. And interestingly enough, this morning I remembered buying curtains. And that piece of material was actually bought in the early 80s. And I still have the curtain up to today. Alive and well, extremely good quality. That's one of my recollections of Huggins being top quality. I remember that as a girl. What I think Huggins has shown is over the last 100 years is a very rich legacy of basically rolling with the punches as times have changed. And as I said, Grenada has a very colorful history, and the fact that the company has been able to rally through that 100 years is something to be celebrated. And one of the things to learn from it is that creativity, innovation, a leadership style that speaks to team spirit, and a leadership style that concentrates on the customer, and in this case, I'm looking at customer from two perspectives. The first customer being your actual employees, making sure that they are comfortable, and then the next customer being the actual persons who are buying and that you're buying and selling with, making sure they're comfortable. I think once you continue along that vein of making sure that your employees are comfortable, your customers are comfortable, and moving to suit whatever is thrown at you, as in this case of COVID, I think the company would be in good stead for the next 100 years. Excellent.
So, okay, Mr. Joseph, I'm coming to you. You've had, similar to Mr. Lahi, you've spent time within the company. You've also said that you've taken some of those tenets you learned and built your own empire outside. What do you see? What do you see at this juncture for Huggins going forward?
Well, I see quite a bit of, what should I say? There's a lot of improvement from the time that Mr. Menis took over, and the continued improvement under this new dispensation. I also would like to say I'm a customer of Huggins, a loyal customer. You may not know that, but I probably spend $1 million a year with Huggins purchasing as a small customer, whether it's my homemade bakery or Chef Castle, or through the flour mill, which is no longer the Huggins, but from there. So from the service point of view as a customer, I'm very happy because of the service that customer. Yeah, but more than that, I wish to leave again that if your staff treated well and understanding and educating your staff is a necessity so that you'll appreciate. So education of the staff and education also of Huggins, this exercise has been done, is an education in itself of private sector and the challenges of what, quote unquote, a so-called large company. Some people equate large company. I'm glad Anya kind of clarified small and large. It's a different thing today, and especially in these small islands, about large companies. They're good corporate citizens. So people will see large company and equate it with a conglomerate in the United States. And then you may have a different idea of the man in the street thinking that this large company is only about profits. Right. And Anya has indicated that the large company in these small islands, most of them, not all, but I can attest to Huggins from where I sat as an employee. As I say, I started with $120 a month and I moved to my own business. That Huggins has always, and I know it will continue under Anya, take to heart not only the customer's happiness and the service, but the social consciousness of contributing back as a good corporate citizen to the nation building. And that the employees would understand this, and the majority would sell this within so that the company can last another 100 years for their children and children to benefit, whether as future employees, because a company like this is shareholdings, of which most of it are by the employees. Some, I don't think, even though I don't even think that Mr. Menis owned the 51% majority.
Does not.
I think he has a large block, but there are other factors. So and those shareholders are Grenadians, you understand, and some of them employees. So the understanding of what a company like Huggins, what it does for the national economy, what it does for the social environment, what it does for the people, the small shops and so on, the contributing factor. I think this is a conversation that needs to be started, and it's a good place to start with a good company that has a track record and for people to understand, and we develop more entrepreneurs,
Right.
small, and give them the positivity of being involved in a company. Because, as I said, when I left Huggins, I resigned from Huggins in 1984, right after the collapse of the revolution in '83, and I started with a small store. I started on my house, and I decided that it's time that I get out on my own. And I started with getting less than half the money I left Huggins with. So just to be on my own, to be my own boss. And now I employ 60 people. So it's not hard to do once you have the mind, once you feed yourself with the positive thoughts that you can do it. And of course, with the experience gained, anybody can do it.
Excellent.
Once it, and I'm just saying that the staff in Huggins continues to support the management. I know most of the young fellows who are actually employed indirectly, whether it's Chris David or have contributed to a board of directors. I'm proud to see these young people are now in board of directors of Huggins. So, and I support, I continue to support the philosophy.
The movement continues.
Yes, it continues. Everybody here. Yes.
Thank you.
So before I come to you, Mrs. Chow, to wrap up, of course, we mentioned the sports and the contribution, but of course, there's so many more things that Huggins has contributed to in the education, supporting of culture. You're a major sponsor of Carnival. We didn't have enough time to go through all the corporate social responsibility that your company is involved in. I know during the pandemic, we saw you and your team going out delivering hampers to the St. Martin's Home and other places. I know yesterday you were on the road delivering lunch, surprising your staff as part of the centennial with your management team. I mean, just the touches that make staff feel important, that make customers feel important, that make a big business really a big small business, right? And so in this final word that I'm going to give you, I guess, is just for whatever you want to say to the people who are watching now and who have been here and supported you and your company over the last 100 years. And I guess hopefully will continue to support you and your business, for the next 100 years. So I'm giving you the final word.
Thank you. It's a very sobering thought to sit here and to listen to individuals of the level of acumen and experience, and so varying as these panelists. When you to sit here and think of the weight of the responsibility that you hold in an office, such as that is of the CEO of George F. Huggins and Company Grenada Limited. When I execute my duties, I do not revel in the luxuries that come with the job. Those things are fleeting, they come and they go, and they don't define, and they ought not to define a leader. I consider in all things the weight of my obligation to my board, to my management committee, to my 500 and plus 528, I think was the last count, employees. The weight of responsibility you bear for your customers. And it was really brought home during this pandemic, walking the lines. And I said this before, people talk about the length of the lines and the lines and the lines and the lines. These were not lines, these were my customers. These were folks who were out in the hot sun trying to get food for their families. The employees, I don't see Mrs. Francis Patrick, right? I don't see Mrs. Brown. I see Selena, her daughter. I see her husband. I see the families of those people who depend on Huggins for a living. So it's a very sobering thought. And it is a privilege to be able to serve this company because I feel really good working for this company. There's a sense of satisfaction knowing that you work for a company whose managers, directors, employees stand for good values. And with every privilege comes responsibility, as far as I am concerned. And I just want to therefore say to all those viewing, to all the customers, to all those who support Huggins, who are members of the family by extension, or by, how shall I say, both, when you apply and you are accepted into its employ. I want to say that I take my responsibility very seriously. And what I can assure, for as long as I have the honor to be able to hold this position, is to embrace those values that we've heard about, that have formed the foundation for who we are as a big small business. And those values will always endure. Despite pandemics or revolutions or hurricanes, I'm going on, I have a meeting shortly because we have something brewing coming up towards us, but we will endure because we embrace those quality values. So our customers can be assured of those things. We may not get it perfectly all the time, but this is certainly our objective, right? 100 years and 100% satisfaction from a 100% Grenadian company. Right?
I think that's an excellent point to stop. And I want to thank our panelists very much this morning. I think you have contributed a wealth of information, historic, educational material. I mean, just things to whet your appetite for young people looking at Huggins as a future place of employment, to customers making decisions as to why they should choose Huggins or continue to do business with Huggins. I think that in this little hour you have shown so many facets of the company, why you continue to be a major driving force in Grenada's economic history and in the wider context of business here. So again, I wish you all the best. For another 100 years, another century of service. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for your contributions and your timely memory. Your memory is very sharp. I mean, down to the details. I think you need to, also may need to write a book.
It's on its way.
We have a lot of
Yes. We've had a nice discussion about that, yeah.
And Dr. Phillip-Dowe, well, I mean, you are steeped in research, so we expect nothing less than facts and figures from you. And so you've definitely brought that, and Mr. Lahi, you've definitely been somebody who has served this company very well, and also the wider world of sports, and certainly continue where I'm sure whenever you're called to give of human service. It has been my singular pleasure to host this panel this morning. And again, I know there's some more things in the pipeline for the centennial. We didn't even touch on some of the things. I know you talked about marking Mr. Menezes' legacy through educational scholarships and things like that. I don't want to let out too much of the secrets.
But that's coming, yes.
But that's coming.
Yeah.
So we probably will meet here again to talk more about that. And to you, the viewers, and to our technical team, because we have some of the very best in the room with us trying to make us look and sound good. And I hope that we have done that and kept that part of the bargain. I want to say thank you to everyone who has contributed to today's successful discussion. And let's meet here again. Let's not wait for another 100 years.
I'll be there. I don't know about you.
Thank you, and goodbye.
What we are embarking on this morning is a mission of gratitude, because that we have not arrived here on our own. We have arrived here today as a result of the blood, sweat, and tears of many who went before us. For better, for worse, we are here today. We are a strong entity today because of the talent and capability and strength of the people who went before us. And so it is our job to begin the legacy for the next 100 years. And today we do so by going out to our employees and offering, as their leadership team, our humble gratitude and thanks. Because we could not hold the offices we hold without the teams that drive us forward. a century of service. Service to those whom we lead. Service to this company that's bigger and greater than any one of us individually. But collectively, we are the strength of this company.
To 100 years, a century of service. Hip, hip, hip. Hooray! Hip, hip, hip. Hooray! Hip, hip, hip. Hooray!
This live stream was powered by Partygrenada.com.